Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Mari. I'm one of the librarians at Portland Public Library, and I'm here today to continue reading our book, Searching for Dragons by Patricia C. Wrede. This is the second book in the Enchanted Forest Chronicles, and it's published by Scholastic. We're going to start where we left off on chapter 9, when Submarine and Mendenbar just left the giantess Balimore's house with a very large carpet, a little old, a little worn, but sort of a creamish yellow colored with bright pink, giant 1-foot tall teddy bears as a pattern. And they have just started to fly off to go see if they can find Kazul. Chapter 9, in which they discover the perils of borrowed equipment. At first, the magic carpet ride was thoroughly enjoyable. The air was crisp and cool, and there was no noise at all except for their own voices. The view was amazing, and even better than looking down from a mountain. The mountains of morning stood in a crooked gray row below, each crack and boulder outlined in sharp black shadow. Tiny figures moved across the rocks and through the strips of greenery at the bottom of the mountains, sheep and mountain goats and adventurous knights. Every now and again, Mendenbar caught a glimpse of the lush trees of the enchanted forest between the peaks. "Stop craning your neck like that," Submarine said. "You're confusing the carpet." "Sorry." Mendenbar snuck a last look and sighed as the patch of green disappeared behind a rock slope. How was Willin getting along without him? "Mendenbar, is your sword slipping?" Submarine said. "I thought I felt something for a moment there. Is it coming out of the sheath?" "No," Mendenbar replied, checking it. "It's fine, and I haven't touched it. Are you sure it was the sword?" "No," Submarine admitted. "Maybe we just flew over something magical, and that's what I felt. It's gone now." "Good," said Mendenbar. "Are you—" The carpet gave a sudden lurch sideways, and then dropped 3 feet. "Mendenbar!" Submarine cried. "I told you to stop doing that." "It wasn't me," Mendenbar protested, trying to find something to hang on to. "Well, it wasn't me, and there's only 2 of us up here," Submarine shouted. The carpet rippled alarmingly, and then resumed its peaceful progress. Cautiously, Mendenbar turned his head to look at Submarine. Wisps of black hair had come loose from her braids to blow wildly across her face. It made her look particularly lovely, even though she was scowling at him. Mendenbar blinked and pulled his thoughts together. "I really didn't do anything," he said. "But—" The carpet wriggled and began to spin slowly. Mendenbar swallowed hard, wishing he had not eaten quite so much breakfast. He closed his eyes and then opened them again very quickly as the carpet bounced twice, paused, and started spinning twice as fast in the opposite direction. "Carpet!" Mendenbar shouted. "Cut it out!" The lurching and spinning stopped. The carpet hung motionless in mid-air for a long moment and then dropped like the bottom falling out of a cardboard box. Submarine gasped, then said something that sounded like, "Ooh!" as the carpet froze once more, 3 feet lower than it had been. Mendenbar started to push himself up, and then without warning, the carpet dropped another 3 feet. This time Mendenbar stayed flat on the teddy bears. 2 seconds later, the carpet dropped again, and again, and again. Mendenbar lost track of the bumps and concentrated on keeping track of his stomach. Suddenly, the carpet spun around twice and took off in a steep, fast climb. "Whoa!" Submarine cried. "Whoa! You stupid carpet! Cut it out!" Again the carpet froze. Then it dropped again, but this time instead of bumping, it fell like a stone. Mendenbar got a glimpse of the ground, drawing quickly closer, and then he had both hands on the hilt of his sword. He didn't bother to pull it out of the sheath. He just yanked at the power it held and flung it around himself and Submarine. Then he shoved with all his might. Their speed slowed abruptly. The carpet fell away beneath them, rippling angrily, and plopped down on the rocky depression at the foot of the mountain. Mendenbar and Submarine drifted after it, landing softly in the carpet's center. There they lay for a moment, catching their breath and collecting their wits. Finally, Mendenbar raised his head and looked warily around. They lay in the middle of a circle of pine trees. "I think we've arrived," he said, sitting up. "Good," Submarine said shakily. She sat up, pushing tendrils of her hair out of her face, and gave him a crooked smile. "I guess I should have asked Balimore a few more questions about this carpet before we took it." "Yes, well, it's too late now," Mendenbar said, rolling off the carpet and standing up. "How far have we come?" "A little over halfway, I think. Too far to walk back, not far enough to walk the rest of the way there." She made a face at the teddy bears, which looked innocently back. "We may have to try the carpet again." We don't have to try it right away, though, Mendebar pointed out. There's a house over there. You can see the roof through the trees. Maybe the owner can tell us exactly where we are and the shortest way to get where we're going. All right, Summerine agreed with a swiftness that made Mendebar think that she was no more eager to get back on the carpet than he was. We will have to bring the carpet with us, though. If you leave magical things lying around, all sorts of dreadful things happen. Mendebar had to admit that she was right, though he wasn't happy about it. They set Ballimore's lunch in the middle of the carpet and then rolled the rug around it, folding the fringe carefully to the inside. Then Summerine took the front end and Mendebar picked up the rear, and they started towards the house. Weaving through 3 rows of pine trees, they ducked under the low-hanging branches along the outer edge of the grove and emerged in front of the house. It looked, thought Mendebar, as if it had been put together by the same person who had built his palace, except for that instead of too many towers and staircases, this house had too many windows. Square windows, round windows, wide windows, tall windows, skinny windows, diamond windows, tiny windows filled with milky glass, enormous picture windows, window with stained glass pictures of ladies in sweeping robes and birds with gold feathers, open windows with curtains billowing out of them. The roof was made of red tile and skylights, and the chimney had a square block of clear glass on the front side. Even the door had a window on it, right in the middle, at about waist height. With only 2 floors, there were hardly enough walls to hold all the windows, in spite of the way that the building sprawled in all directions. As they drew near, Mendebar felt a faint aura of power around the house, hanging in the air like a mist. He was about to mention it to Summerine when he heard yells and shouts of laughter coming from behind the house. Suddenly a small blonde girl dashed around the corner and stopped short, staring. A slightly larger boy followed in hot pursuit and barely managed to stop in time to avoid a collision. The blonde child looked at him reproachfully and then turned to the house and shrieked at the top of her voice, "Herman! Herman! There's people!" "Bah!" A deep, cross voice came carrying through the open window besides the door. "I don't want any people. Tell them to go away." The girl obediently turned to Summerine. "Go away, please," she said, and stuck her thumb in her mouth. "No, thank you," Summerine responded. "We want to talk to your parents." "Haven't got any," said the boy. He tilted his head to one side as if considering, and then took off for the house in a dead run. "Herman, they won't go," he shouted as he ran. "They want parents. His shouting stopped as he dove headfirst through the open window and vanished inside. One of the upstairs windows scraped open and 2 older children poked their heads out. At the same time, 3 small heads appeared around the corner of the house, gazing timidly at Mendebar and Summerine. Summerine looked at Mendebar and set her end of the carpet on the ground. Mendebar put his end down, too, and stepped forward to stand beside her. The children stared at them without speaking. "Absolutely not!" a cross voice shouted. The front door of the house flew open and a dwarf stomped out. He was not much taller than the oldest of the children, but his long black beard and muscular arms showed plainly that he was no child. His hair looked like an upside-down black haystack. He glared angrily at Mendebar. "I won't do it," the dwarf declared before either Mendebar nor Summerine could say anything. "I don't care if it's family tradition. I don't care if you need the money. I don't care if her mother lied and now you have to convince your council. I don't care if your mother is going to turn her into a toad tomorrow if she doesn't perform. I will not do it, and that's final." "That's quite all right," Summerine said. "We don't want you to. We just want—" "I know what you want," the dwarf said, hopping furiously from one foot to the other. "You want a chance to talk me into it. Well, you won't get one, missy. You should be ashamed to even consider such a thing." "She isn't considering it," Mendebar said. "We're travelers. We've just stopped to get some directions." The dwarf paused mid-hop. Balancing on one foot, he peered suspiciously at Mendebar. One of the children giggled. The dwarf glared in the direction of the sound and then turned back to Mendebar. "Directions? What sort of directions?" he asked with evident mistrust. "Who are you, anyway?" "I'm Princess Summerine, and this is King Mendebar," Summerine said, "and we're trying to get to the cave where the dragon Falgorn lives." "Oh, you're after a dramatic rescue," the dwarf said with relief. "I suppose that's all right. But are you sure you know what you're getting into? Dragons are tough." No, Summerine said in the exasperated tone of someone who was very tired of correcting the same mistake over and over. I'm chief cook and librarian for Kazul, the king of dragons, and I'm very happy with my job, and I don't want anyone to rescue you. The dwarf's eyes narrowed. Then why are you looking for this other dragon? Because I have an urgent message for Kazul, and she's gone to visit Falgorn, Mendabar explained. Huh. The dwarf hesitated, looking from Cimmerine to Mendabar. How do I know this isn't some sort of trick? Why should we want to trick you? Cimmerine asked. To get me to spin straw into gold for you, you silly girl, the dwarf said. That's why everyone comes to see me. And look at the thanks I get. Children. Hundreds of little children. Bah! The littlest children giggled and pulled their heads back behind the corner as the dwarf spun around. The blonde girl stared solemnly at him for a minute, and then took her thumb out of her mouth, ran forward, and gave the dwarf an enormous hug. Thank you, Herman, she said to the dumbfounded dwarf. She hugged him again and skipped off, apparently tired of listening. The dwarf smiled foolishly after her. The expression made him look pleasant and almost handsome. After a moment, the dwarf turned back to Cimmerine, and his frown returned. I don't see the connection between the children and spinning straw into gold, Mendabar said, before the dwarf could start complaining again. Would you be good enough to explain it for me? Explain? The dwarf fumed. That's what the last girl said, and what happened? Twins is what happened. She claimed that she couldn't remember which one was first, so I ended up with both of them. I can see why that would be annoying, Cimmerine said, non-committally. The dwarf glared at her. Yes, you say that now, but what's the use? You'll get it out of me one way or another. If you'd rather not tell us, Mendabar started, but the dwarf cut him off with a despairing wave. It doesn't matter. It's my fate, that's what it is. I should never have agreed to learn to spin straw into gold in the first place. Why did you? Mendabar asked. It's a family tradition, the dwarf answered gloomily. Of course it doesn't work if you're just spinning for yourself. So a long time ago, my great-grandfather offered to use his talents to help out a girl who was in a sticky situation. If he hadn't been such a do-gooder, I wouldn't be in this mess. What good did he do exactly? Mendabar said. The local prince had gotten a notion that the girl could spin straw into gold, the dwarf said. Brainless young idiot, but they're all like that. If she could spin straw into gold, why was she living in a hovel? Anyway, Gramps said that he'd do her spinning for her in return for part of the gold and her firstborn child. She agreed, but naturally when the baby was born, she didn't want to give him up. So Gramps agreed to a guessing game. If she could guess his name, she could keep the baby. Then he'd let her find out what his name was. And she kept the baby, and Gramps kept the gold, and everyone went home happy. I think I'm beginning to get the idea, Cimmerine said. It's not just spinning straw into gold that's a family tradition, is it? It's the whole scheme. The dwarf nodded sadly. Right the first time. Only I can never make it work properly. I can find plenty of girls who are supposed to spin straw into gold, and most of them suggest the guessing game, but I've never had one who managed to guess my name. Oh, dear, said Cimmerine. I even changed my name legally, so it would be easier, the dwarf said sadly. Herman isn't a difficult name to remember, is it? But no, the silly chicks can't do it. So I end up with a baby as well as the gold, and the babies eat and cry and need clothes, and the gold runs out, and I have to find another girl to spin for, and it happens all over again, and I end up with another baby. It isn't fair. You seem to be fond of the children, though, Mendabar said. The dwarf turned and looked to see whether any of the children were within hearing distance, and then nodded sheepishly. They're good kids. It's just that there are too many of them. I moved out here so it would be harder for the silly girls to find me, talk me into spinning for them. But they keep finding me anyway. It was a rather drastic move, wasn't it? Cimmerine said. What about the dragons and giants and rock snakes and so on? Oh, they're no problem. The house used to belong to a magician, and he left a lot of guarding spells on it. Nothing nasty can get anywhere near it. That's why it feels magical, Mendabar said, relieved. It's an odd sort of house for a wizard, Cimmerine said, studying it. Why so many windows? Not a wizard, the dwarf said. A magician. He was trying to find out which kind of windows work best when they're enchanted. Did he find out? I suppose so, or he wouldn't have let me buy it. Most of the windows don't work anymore, but there's a round one at the end of the attic that still shows things once in a while. What kind of things? Mendabar asked. Can you ask it to see something in particular, or does it just show scenes at random? You have to ask, the dwarf said, and you don't always get an answer. Would you like to see it? Yes, please, Cimmerine said quickly. Mendebar looked doubtfully at the carpet, wondering whether it would be safe to leave where it was with all the children around, and thinking how much trouble it would be to haul along if they didn't. "Let it be," the dwarf said, following Mendebar's gaze. "The kids won't touch it." With some reluctance, Mendebar nodded and followed the dwarf and Submarine into the house. The inside was just as maze-like as Mendebar had expected from the rambling exterior. The dwarf led them down a passage, around a corner, and up a flight of creaky wooden stairs, through a room lined with pictures, up another flight of stairs, and down a long hall to the cramped, stuffy little room under the furthest slope of the roof. The only light came from a circular window about twice the size of Mendebar's head. "There it is," said the dwarf. "If you want to see something, ask, but I can't guarantee it will work." "Show me Kazul, king of dragons," Submarine commanded at once. For a moment nothing happened. Then Mendebar felt a tentative swelling of magic around the window. "I think it needs a boost," he said, and he reached for his sword. "No, let me," said Submarine. She thought for a moment and then raised her right hand and pointed it out the window. "Power of water, wind, and earth, cast the spell to show its birth, raise the fire to stop the harm, by the power of this charm." Power surged around the window and the glass went milk-white. "What did you do?" Mendebar said, impressed. "It's a dragon spell," Submarine told him, keeping her eyes fixed on the window. "It's easy to remember, and it's not hard to adapt it to do just about anything. I found it in Kazul's— Look!" The window glass had cleared. Through the circular pane, Mendebar could see the inside of a large cave. A sphere of golden light, like a giant glowing soap bubble, covered half the cave, and inside the glow was a dragon. She was easily 4 times as tall as Mendebar, even without counting her wings. 3 short, stubby horns stuck out of her head, 1 on each side and 1 in the center of her forehead. Her scales were just starting to turn gray at the edges. An angry-looking trickle of smoke leaked out of her mouth as she breathed. In front of the bubble stood 2 tall, bearded men in long robes, carrying staffs of polished wood. "Wizards!" Submarine said angrily. "I knew it!" Chapter 10, in which Mendebar decides to experiment. Mendebar stared at the window, angrier than he could remember being in a long time. In the back of his mind, he could hear a voice reminding him that the King of the Dragons was no concern of the King of the Enchanted Forest, and that the Society of Wizards was a dangerous group to offend or interfere with. He could hear another voice that sounded very like Willen's, suggesting envoys and formal complaints. But he was in no mood to pay attention to either of them. Mendebar was not going to stand by and let the Society of Wizards kidnap and imprison anyone, King of the Dragons or not. "Huh," said the dwarf. "So you weren't kidding about looking for that dragon?" "Of course not," Submarine snapped. Her eyes were fixed on the window, and there was a crease between her eyebrows. "But where are they? Window, show me where they are." Magic rose up around the window in a great wave, and Mendebar felt an answering surge in his sword. The window turned bright green, glowing brighter and brighter, and then suddenly shattered into dust. "Hey!" the dwarf said. "My window!" "Drat!" Submarine's hands clenched into fists, and she glared at the empty space where the window had been. After a moment, she shook her head and turned to the dwarf. "I'm sorry, Herman. I didn't know it would do that, and we really don't know any more than we did before." "Oh, yes, we do," Mendebar said. "We know some wizards have captured Kazul, and we know that they're somewhere in the Enchanted Forest." "We do?" "I'm sure of it. I think that's why the window couldn't show any more general picture of where they were. Things in the Enchanted Forest move around a lot, especially if the forest doesn't like something. I'll bet my crown that—" Mendebar waved at the empty window frame. "That is something that the Enchanted Forest doesn't like one bit." "All right, but that doesn't help much," Submarine said. "The Enchanted Forest is a big place. How are we going to find them?" "That won't be a problem," Mendebar said. "I'm the King of the Enchanted Forest, remember?" "That makes you good at finding missing dragons?" "It makes me good at finding out what's going on," Mendebar said. "I can tell when places are moving around, and I can get to where I want to go even when it's moving. I don't think it will be too hard once we get back in the forest." "Then let's go," Submarine said. "I didn't like the look of that bubble thing the wizards had around Kazul." "At least they don't seem to have hurt her," Mendebar offered. "That's true. Oh, I wish I knew where they were." Scowling at the broken window and then turning sharply away, almost running into the dwarf. "I don't understand this at all," the dwarf said, looking from Submarine to Mendebar with a puzzled frown. "I'm sorry, but we don't have time to explain," Mendebar said. I'm sorry that we don't have time to explain," Mendebar said, "but I'm afraid we don't." "Thank you for all your help," Submarine added. The dwarf shook his head and led them back to the front door, frowning in such deep concentration the whole time that neither Mendebar nor Simmerine could bring themselves to interrupt. In the doorway, the dwarf paused. "Are you sure you don't want gold?" he asked. "Quite sure," Mendebar said. "We have a long walk ahead of us, and gold is awfully heavy." "I thought you didn't want to spin gold anymore," Simmerine said. The dwarf looked down. "It's not the spinning, it's the rest of it," he said not very clearly. "And spinning's the only way I know how to make money, and you wouldn't believe how fast kids grow." "Oh," Simmerine said. She bit her lip. "What if we asked you to spin some gold for us and then let you keep it?" she asked without much hope. "No," the dwarf said. "I tried it once. It just doesn't work." "Can you spin for the children?" Mendebar asked. The dwarf shook his head. "They're my responsibility, so it's the same as spinning for myself, as far as the spell's concerned. "What are you going to do with them all?" Simmerine said, as renewed shrieks and the sound of pounding feet came through the open door. "Oh, most of them will grow up and save their kingdoms from something or other in the nick of time," the dwarf said. "Long-lost heirs, that's what makes it so difficult. I have to see that they're properly trained on top of everything else." "Training?" Mendebar said under his breath. He squinted into the sunlight, trying to catch hold of an idea hovering just out of reach. "I don't suppose their parents," Simmerine trailed off, as the dwarf shook his head. "A bargain's a bargain. Besides, it wouldn't be the same without them running all over. I can't give them back." "Of course not," Mendebar said, blinking. He smiled suddenly. "But you can charge for training them, can't you?" An answering smile lit up Simmerine's face. "A boarding school for long-lost heirs. What a good idea." "A school?" Dwarf said as if the words tasted funny. "A boarding school? I don't know." "Why not?" Simmerine said. "It would solve your money problems for sure. Special schools are always horribly expensive. You could charge the parents of your children for the training part and take on a few more kids at training plus full room and board." The dwarf's eyes gleamed at the idea, but then his face fell. "What about my spinning?" he said. "It is a family tradition." Simmerine rolled her eyes. "Haven't you done enough of that already?" "Well, I have an idea about that, too," Mendebar put in. "The problem with this spell is that you can't spin for yourself or for anyone who's in your responsibility, right?" "That's it in a nutshell," the dwarf said, "and there's nothing to be done about that." "What if you set up a scholarship fund?" Mendebar said. "I bet a really good lawyer could design one that would get around the spell's restriction so that you could spin for it." Simmerine nodded. "A good lawyer can get around just about anything. And if that doesn't work, you could spin for other scholarship funds and only take part of the gold, the way that you usually do." "I never thought of spinning for a fund," the dwarf said in wonder. "You think about it then," Mendebar said. "We have to go." "Yes," said Simmerine. "I won't feel quite comfortable until I know that Kazul is out of that bubble. Thank you again." They left the dwarf in the doorway, muttering to himself about rooms and expenses, and walked over to the rolled-up carpet. Mendebar looked at it with distaste, remembering their wild ride. He hoped Simmerine wasn't going to insist on using it right away. His stomach hadn't completely settled from the last time. He turned his head. Simmerine was looking at him with a wary expression. "Let's carry it for a while," she suggested. "The children are probably watching, and we shouldn't give them any ideas." "Right," Mendebar said with relief. "Do you want the front end or the back?" Simmerine took the back end, and they hoisted the carpet to their shoulders and started off. Walking with the carpet was surprisingly easy. Simmerine was a good match for Mendebar in height, and she was quite strong. Mendebar supposed it must be from carrying around dragon-sized servings of lamb and beef, and before he actually thought, he said as much. "Actually, it's the chocolate mousse and cherries jubilee." "I didn't think that chocolate mousse was particularly heavy." "It is when you've got a bucket full in each hand," Simmerine retorted. "Oh," said Mendebar. "Yes, I suppose it would be." He was trying to figure out how much a bucket of mousse would weigh when the carpet jerked suddenly. Mendebar grabbed at it, thinking, "Oh no, it's going to start dancing around on its own." And then he realized that the carpet had jerked because Simmerine had stopped. He looked reproachfully over his shoulder. "It's time for lunch," Simmerine said. "All this talk of food is making me hungry, and I don't want to have to face a lot of wizards on an empty stomach." Now that she mentioned it, he was hungry too. "Good idea," Mendebar said with enthusiasm. "And this looks like a really nice spot to stop. Will you serve, or shall I?" Simmerine laughed. They set the rolled-up carpet on a stretch of grass between two pines and got out Balimore's package, and then sat down to see what the giantess had set along with them. It was, as Mendebar had expected, an enormous quantity of food. 7 fat pastries stuffed with chicken and herbs, a large bottle of cold spring water, a round loaf of bread and a generous wedge of yellow cheese, 4 large red apples, and a small box filled with wonderful creamy chocolate fudge. My goodness, Simrine said, when they had unpacked everything. Ballamore certainly believes in feeding people well. Look at all of this. No, no, Menenbar said, picking up one of the pastries and handing it to Simrine. Don't look at it. Eat it. I wonder where she got the fudge, Simrine mused. Everything else is probably from the Cauldron of Plenty, but it doesn't do desserts well. Maybe she made it herself. I hope so, Simrine smiled, as Menenbar looked in surprise. If she did, I can ask her for the recipe. By an unspoken mutual agreement, neither Menenbar nor Simrine mentioned Kazul or the wizards during lunch, though they were both certainly thinking about them. Instead, they had a pleasant talk about some of the odd and interesting people they'd each met over the past few years. Simrine knew a lot of unusual folk. Many of them were dragons, of course, but her position as Kazul's chief cook and librarian meant that she had also met most of the visitors from outside the Mountains of Mourning, who came to pay their respects to the king of dragons or to ask her questions. Near the end of the meal, Menenbar noticed that Simrine was gazing intently at him. No, not at him, at his sword. What is it? Menenbar asked worriedly. Have you been doing things with that sword again? Simrine demanded. No, Menenbar said, puzzled. I used it on your sink and to stop the nightshade, and when the carpet started falling, but that's it. Why? Because it's leaking magic all over the place, Simrine said. I thought so before, but now I'm positive. She finished her second pastry and stood up, brushing crumbs from her lap. That sheath must not be as good as I thought. Would you mind letting me look at it, without the sword? Not at all, Menenbar answered. He stood up and drew the sword. Simrine flinched. Is something wrong? I don't know, Simrine said. Can't you feel it? Feel what? Your sword. It isn't the sheath, after all. It's that dratted sword. It's gotten worse. Put it away, quickly. Thoroughly puzzled, Menenbar did as Simrine asked. All right, he said. Now would you please explain? I'm not sure I can, Simrine said. You didn't know what I meant before when I said your sword reeked of magic, so I suppose it's reasonable now that you can't tell that the reek is twice as strong. You'll just have to take my word for it. Menenbar looked at the sword, thinking hard. It's linked to the enchanted forest, and I've never taken it out of the forest before, he said at last. Maybe it doesn't like it. Maybe it's trying to make the mountains more like the enchanted forest. It sounded silly put that way, but he couldn't think of how else to say it. It sounded even sillier if he told her that he thought the sword was trying to stuff some magic into the empty, barren-feeling land around him. Said Simrine, glancing absently at the sword. After a moment she looked up. I bet you're right. Bother, that means we have to use the carpet. She bent and started packing up the remnants of their lunch. Wait a minute, Menenbar said. What has my sword got to do with the carpet? If being outside the enchanted forest is what makes your sword behave like a magic beacon, then we have to get it back inside this enchanted forest as fast as we can, Simrine explained patiently. Otherwise, every ogre and wizard for leagues and leagues around us will come looking for whatever is making all the fuss. And the carpet is a lot faster than walking. I don't trust it. We managed before. It ought to be easier now that we know what to expect. Here, help me. She knelt and began unrolling the carpet as she spoke. Do we know what to expect? Remembering the bumping, spinning, and unpredictable ride, Menenbar shuddered. Look, I don't like it any better than you do, but we have to do something about that sword. Besides, the sooner we get to the forest, the sooner we can find out where those wizards have Kazul. Do we have any other choice? I could probably use the sword to get us to the enchanted forest, Menenbar suggested. Simrine sat back on her heels, staring at him. You can do that with it. Why on earth didn't you say so to begin with? We could have gone straight to Kazul's grandchildren's cave and saved a lot of time. I didn't mention it before because I'm not really sure it will work, Menenbar said. I've never tried that particular spell out of the enchanted forest before, and it wouldn't be a good idea to test it for the first time to get somewhere I've never been, especially somewhere that isn't in the enchanted forest either. Actually, he hadn't tried any of his usual spells outside the enchanted forest before, for the very good reason that he hadn't ever been outside the enchanted forest since he'd become king and started working magic, but he didn't like to mention that in front of Simrine. He was quite sure that if she had suddenly become the ruler of a magical kingdom, she would have tested all her new spells and powers and abilities immediately, under as many different conditions as she could come up with. He didn't want her to think that he was careless or neglectful. So we can either experiment with the carpet again or experiment with your spell, Simrine said. She scowled thoughtfully at the teddy bears, and then looked at Mendenbar and smiled. Let's try the spell. What do you want me to do? Just stand there, Mendenbar said, returning her smile. I've never worked with another magician, and one experiment at a time is enough. Why haven't you? Cimarine asked as she climbed to her feet. Worked with another magician, I mean. From what you were telling me yesterday, you've got more than enough work for a couple assistants. I've never had time to find any assistants, Mendenbar said, except Willin, my steward, and he's never learned much magic. You mean you're running the whole enchanted forest by yourself? Cimarine said. You're as bad as the dragons. What? It took me 6 months to persuade them that the king of dragons didn't need to do everything all the time, Cimarine explained, and then it took me 3 more months to get a system set up so they wouldn't keep running to Kazul with every little problem. You set a system? How? I mean, how did you know? Mendenbar's voice trailed off. To his surprise, Cimarine flushed very slightly. I studied a lot of unusual things when I was growing up, she said. Unusual for a princess, I mean. Politics was one of them. It sounds perfectly reasonable for a princess to study to me, Mendenbar said. Look at how useful it's been for you. Well, it's not one of the things that a princess is supposed to learn, Cimarine said. You wouldn't believe the fuss they made when they found out I talked my protocol teacher into covering it. What were you supposed to be learning then? Cimarine made a face. Embroidery and dancing and etiquette and proper behavior. No wonder princesses are silly if that's all they're supposed to know about, Mendenbar said without thinking. He blinked and added hastily, Not you. I mean, you aren't silly even if you are a princess. I mean, don't try to explain yourself anymore. You'll only make it worse, Cimarine said, laughing. Now, hadn't we better try that spell? We are in a bit of a hurry, remember? Right. With some difficulty, Mendenbar pushed the discussion out of his mind and tried to remember how he'd been planning to work the transportation spell. Usually he twisted one of the threads of magic that crisscrossed the enchanted forest, pulling himself to his destination. But outside the forest, there were no threads that he could feel. There was power in the sword, though, and it was linked with the enchanted forest. If he pulled on that, he should be able to move wherever he chose back to the forest. Before he moved anything, however, he would have to indicate who and what he wanted to move. He didn't want to arrive in the enchanted forest with a magic carpet covered with pink teddy bears and no Cimarine. Mendenbar suppressed a sigh. Spells were so much easier at home where he didn't have to think about them so much. He dismissed that thought and concentrated on figuring out the shape of the spell he wanted. When he was satisfied that he knew exactly what he intended to do and in what order, he put a hand on the hilt of his sword and looked at Cimarine. Ready? Whenever you are, Cimarine said. Mendenbar nodded and drew his sword. He heard Cimarine suck in her breath as he raised the weapon over his head and swung it in a slow circle. Carefully, he pointed the sword at the carpet and pushed a tiny bit of power out to label it for the next part of the spell. Then he pointed the sword at Cimarine and repeated the process, even more gently than before. Cimarine shivered, but she remained silent. Turning, Mendenbar pointed the sword in the direction of the enchanted forest. Now for the tricky part. He drew on the power in the sword, feeling it hum through the hilt and into his hands. In his mind, he pictured the giant trees of the enchanted forest, ranged in silent rows around the rocks that edged the green glass pool, with the still water reflecting them like a green mirror. When he was sure that he had the picture clear and steady in his mind, he gave the power in the sword the same twisting pull that he used to move from place to place within the enchanted forest. Slowly, almost reluctantly, the rocks began to blur and fade. Mist rose, wavering to veil the mountains and the sky. Then, just as the landscape was about to vanish into thick, woolly grayness, the mist stopped condensing. For a moment, everything was still. Then the mist thinned, and the outlines of the rocks and mountains grew sharper. Almost, thought Mendenbar. It must need more power, because we're outside the enchanted forest. He clenched his hands around the hilt of the sword and pulled again, hard. Gray fog slammed down around him, like a window shutter dropping closed. Something hit him like a giant's hammer, and he felt himself falling. Now I've done it, he thought vaguely, just before everything was black. I hope Cimarine is all right. And then he lost consciousness completely. He didn't even feel himself land. And that's where we're going to stop for today. We'll pick up tomorrow with Chapter 11, in which Mendenbar and Cimarine are very busy. My name is Sarah Mari. I'm one of the librarians at Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine, and I'm reading from Searching for Dragons by Patricia C. Wrede, published by Scholastic. See you again soon. Bye!